Hi, I'm April, your host here on SetSet Show and founder of SetSet, a resource for everyone to safely explore cannabis and psychedelics and learn more about their therapeutic potential. Today is Amy Wong Hope, who is a licensed social worker, a trained psilocybin facilitator, a MAPS trained MDMA facilitator, and is the director and founder of the Southwestern University School for Psychedelic Studies. We get into MDMA, what happens now that MAPS new drug application with the FDA has been rejected. I think facilitators and therapists will be particularly curious about this conversation. We touch on mindfulness, not spirituality, mindfulness, and the clinical evidence around microdosing psilocybin. We'll discuss the unique ways that MDMA-assisted therapy can help people reach parts of themselves that traditional therapy sometimes can't. And we'll touch on the book that she published this year, Small Doses of Awareness, which is a microdosing journal designed to help people integrate microdosing into their daily lives. If you're interested in integrating microdosing into your wellness routine, be sure to check out Micropsyched, SetSet's 12-week psilocybin microdosing program that was designed by clinicians to guide you through safe, structured approach to learn how to microdosing yourself. It's a DIY. This guide provides a step-by-step to microdosing that supports both beginners and experienced users. Join us as we explore the power of small doses and mindful practices with Amy Wong Hope. Let our audience know how we came to be here.
You and I met through a workshop for a book that my co-author Xinyi Pei and I wrote called Small Doses of Awareness, a Microdosing Companion, a guided journal. You've got your copy too right there. I am a clinical social worker in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I am an MDMA-assisted therapy trained therapist through MAPS, the MAPS organization, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies and Science. And I also am the director for the Psychedelic Studies program at Southwestern College of Counseling, which is a master's level counseling college and offers continuing ed credits for anybody who is a counselor across the nation, actually. Currently working on some exciting initiatives around psychedelic legislation in the state of New Mexico, where I live. And I also have a private practice where my focus is on treating trauma. I also provide psychedelic preparation and integration services to people. And I will be a graduate of the InterTrack cohort 3, the 2024 cohort for psilocybin facilitator training. I'll get licensed in possibly both locations of Oregon and undertake their additional study so I can get licensed in Colorado. I haven't decided yet, but most of that is so I can practice, talk publicly about that experience, and also integrate that into the psychedelic legislation I will be helping to write and supporting writing and helping folks who are researching it and coming up with policy.
Great. I want to clarify one thing. You established the program that is at the Southwestern University, correct?
Yes, thank
Yes.
you, April. It's hard for me to take credit. Being Asian, sometimes I don't say things like that, but I am the founder of that
Yeah.
program. So I spent the past year and a half researching and pulling in guest speakers from around the world to speak in that program as well. And so really it's to help clinicians or psychotherapists, and actually anybody in the community who might be a nurse practitioner, a doctor, who wants to become psychedelically informed
Wonderful.
and be able to talk to their patients about psychedelics and not feel scared about talking about them and actually know where to look for the information. That's my goal, is for them to understand that they can reach out to networks and get more information.
That's so interesting to me. You can speak openly about psilocybin therapy for MDMA, but it's not legal anywhere.
No,
Do you-
I do think I can speak about it because I do think that as a trauma therapist, we're often working in altered states of consciousness all the time with our clients. I think a lot of that character in Poltergeist, the woman who helps Carol Ann come out. Carol Ann is stuck in a spirit world, and this woman goes in to bring in support, and she's anchored to the outside. And I do think of myself as someone who is anchored to consensus reality. And sometimes our clients have been conditioned with all sorts of beliefs caused by perpetrators and traumas. both overt and implicit. I call it big T trauma, which is the big T traumas are assaults, and sexual assaults, war, and traumatic car crashes. And the small T traumas are the attachment wounds that everyone in the world, I believe we all carry attachment wounds. And sometimes they can come out in every interaction we have. So when I am working with people, I am working in an altered state often
Mhm.
with them. And I see myself as grounded in this reality. I think that psychedelic work is an
Mhm.
extension of that. And I saw that even during my MDMA training when we were doing role
Okay.
plays without MDMA on board. We were doing
Mhm.
role plays and we did them for about 6 hours, different role plays. And we did feel when we were role playing the patient or the facilitator, we did feel like there was medicine
Mm.
in the room. We felt that energy. So I do think it's possible to talk about it.
Okay.
But here in the book, I talk about it really
Right.
explicitly, which was very scary
Right.
and actually really coming out of the psychedelic closet,
Mm.
if you will.
I just said this yesterday or day before yesterday. I don't know how much more medicine I really need. You can get there, right? You can get to the state where you just need to be open to all possibilities, right? And medicine can help you
Mhm,
get there. But once you've experienced that, you just know that you can. Do
mhm.
you always bring medicine into your sessions with your clients after, like with the role playing? I'm assuming that everyone in that room had experienced MDMA and then in the role play in a way that was informed. Do you go back into that space without the medicine?
I think it's absolutely
Mhm.
possible. And it really depends on where the client is at in their stage of
Okay.
integration
Mm,
afterwards and how to hold the
mm,
container of that altered state. And that altered state is where we're more flexible. Our default mode system is a lot more
right.
flexible. And so we're seeing new things. And I really love the way that Dr. David Newt in his book, Psychedelics, the revolutionary drugs that could change
Mhm.
your life, with a play on Michael Pollan's book, right? Which is also brilliant. And David Newt says, really, when traditional hallucinogens are in our system, our brain is
Mm,
freestyling because the default mode system is set up as a filter, a set of glasses, just like I've got on right now that help me to be able to see the world and navigate it, not bump into
mhm,
things. And without that default mode system, we can't tie our shoelaces.
mm,
We wouldn't know the order of getting ready in the morning. So we need that default mode system. But when it's too strong, caused by depression, which can be caused by trauma, or severe anxiety caused by trauma, that default mode system is too strong. I'd almost say it's like a manacle on
mhm,
the brain, and that's where it's not helpful, and that's where psychedelics really are a substance that can be ingested and can loosen the grip
right,
of
right,
that, allowing the brain to freestyle and allowing us to pay attention in a
mm,
different way. And isn't that the very core of mindfulness that we have learned from many different traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, and Judaism? And Christianity. There are deep pockets of mindfulness in those traditions. And so I'm doing that in my sessions with my clients. And sometimes it takes some time to really embody and get them into a state where we're not doing, yes, we're using words because we're not telepathic, right? But can we be in that place of almost soma
mm,
together or liminality, intersubject, because it feels like then there's two worlds combining into one and meeting each other just for that moment. And in that place, they might bring different parts of themselves, wounded parts in. So, yeah, I will say that if clients have had psychedelic experiences, they can bring those back because the mirror neurons in our brains allow for us to be in those liminal spaces
mm.
again, given the right opportunity and container and space.
It sounds like you are very connected to the spiritual, right? And you've studied as well. And you bring this
Mm.
into your sessions with your clients. So, what's the expectation from them? What understanding do they need to have, or background, or belief system when it comes to the spiritual in order to make the most of your sessions together?
Certainly not. Because sometimes it's explicit for clients and sometimes it
Mhm.
isn't. And if it isn't, then I don't use that
Okay.
language.
Right.
I meet them exactly where they're
Okay.
at. As a social worker, really, that's one of our primary directives. Meet your client where they're at. I do see my work as spiritual work, but I would never use that
Mm.
word.
Okay. Mindfulness was the word that you used, not spiritual.
Yeah. But in a way, we are all doing spiritual work because there's something beyond the emotion, the cognition, and our somatic
Mm.
sensations.
It feels like that's part of your Hippocratic oath to meet the client where they are if you were to have one, right? Yeah. You have insight into what's happening right now in psychedelics that's probably more robust and deeper than a lot of the guests that I speak with because we have this singular linear view into what's happening and yours is more
Mm,
expansive. Can you just
mm.
share with us what you're seeing in the psychedelic space? What's evolved since you found this calling? Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to say just based on where we are today in November 1st,
Mhm.
2024, what we've really just gone through in the last 3 months is see that the FDA turned down MDMA as it wasn't a viable option. And one of the biggest challenges within that is for people who are writing policy, legislators, and those who inform the policy to really think about how do we talk about a treatment that is not just a substance. Traditional psychiatry has been a treatment that has just been a substance, right? A lot of traditional psychiatry. And so the psychiatry field is really going through a sea change in terms of defining this. Is the substance of MDMA safe by itself? There were, of course, there have been some ethical problems, just like there have been in psychotherapy and anything for years. That got a very big voice in this. And they didn't consider the past research that actually was legitimate, saying that MDMA is actually not a danger to the heart if you do the right screening and monitoring to make sure the person doesn't have cardiac issues. It is not addictive.
Right.
In places where MDMA was legal, people did not become addicted to it. Could there be an emotional addiction, just like there could be an emotional addiction to cannabis? Yes, absolutely. People can get addicted to wanting to be in that altered state, to be in a blissful state. I always think of cannabis is like the
Mhm.
Cadillac medicine. It makes everything smooth, but then you don't have motivation. That, at least for me, that's what
Yes.
happens. Yeah, but it can really smooth things out. And that can be really important at certain times. MDMA can be very connecting within
Mhm.
oneself and with
Mm.
others. It can be a way to feel pleasure in the body when one has never felt pleasure. It can be a way to feel self compassion and self love when one has never felt that. But the key to me is how to take it and how to integrate that and how to have that without the substance. So in the field, one of the things that I will talk about, right? Because this is a question about where do I see
Mhm.
the field? While the research is showing that from one high dose psilocybin experience, depression is mitigated at minimum for a year, sometimes for longer. And for other people, they need more. They might need another psilocybin or they might need it once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, something like that. But with the right integration, one might be able to get to the point where they don't need a next session. One of the hard things, though, and because the way that media works, it likes to pick the most pithy example and story. And so they want to say, one psilocybin session and your depression will be all set, all
Right.
cured. Rosalind Watts, who is one of the big researchers out of Imperial College of London and who has a beautiful 1 year integration program for folks, said in some of her research papers, one of them said, it's interesting that after 1 year, that's when people start to show more depression in their measures again. And it's because sometimes the integration hasn't gone into changing the lives and the circumstances within the lives that created the depression
Mm.
in the first place.
Does that mean that the depression creeps back in because people didn't see the change that they were hoping for?
People didn't make the change. They didn't make the
Oh,
change happen in our lives. So let's say there's a dynamic in your
mhm.
marriage and it's, oh, I'm not as bothered by that. But as time goes on, it really is a problem or it is inequality in the relationship or something that, right? Just like I like to use the car
Mhm.
metaphor. You might have a fix for the shock absorber, but the axle has an issue.
Hmm.
If you don't address the axle, eventually there's going to be a problem, even if you keep replacing the shock absorber.
That's so interesting. I want to go back to a word that you used. You're not bothered by it, meaning you can adapt for a certain period of time and be accepting of behavior that's not your own or a dynamic that you're one part of. But over time,
Mhm.
the systemic issue, there's just no way to deny that it is having an impact on your overall well being.
Thank you for saying.
Okay.
I really am a systems thinker,
Yeah.
and I think about that, right? What in the system is not
Hmm.
working for my client,
Yeah.
right? And so I say this a lot. So a lot of times when I do psychedelic in preparation and integration, I feel like a Debbie Downer. Chemically, what's going on here? Because the psychedelic is not a magic pill. It's not a magic wand. All it is a non-specific amplifier of all parts of our brain to ourselves for a certain period of time, 4 or 6 hours if it's psilocybin or
Hmm.
MDMA, up to 12 hours if it's
Hmm.
LSD.
Why do you use the word nonspecific? Meaning it impacts all parts of your brain. Got it.
Yeah. Not all parts of our brain. It impacts really the parts of our brain that have the 5-HT2A receptors. And those 5-HT2A receptors are mostly in our default mode system, which is an interconnected set of brain regions that all create our
Mhm.
lenses, our filters for the world.
Yeah, the shortcut for the default mode network, the DMN, is it's our motherboard, like our computer.
Yeah.
Now that the FDA, shocker, we know they do not regulate therapy. We do know
Mm.
that integration part of psychedelic medicine is critical, not
Yes.
mandatory. And
Nope.
we as a culture have been conditioned to take our pill and be on with our life and hope for the best. So my experience so far, people,
Yes.
they really don't want to do the work. That is just how most people feel,
Mm.
whether it's because they can't afford to have somebody that can help them with the work and they don't know what to do, because that's legitimate,
Yeah.
or they have all the
Mhm.
resources in the world, but man, change is hard.
Changes hearts. That's really where the book comes in a little bit more
Mm,
too. Because one of the things in the book that I would really integrate more about, like how to make it pleasurable and to really reinforce inside of ourselves that each step we take that is hard is undoing something that through the years was like a stalagmite, a drip of conditioning that created this hard rock like substance, right? We've all been in a cave. Maybe we've seen a picture of a
yeah.
cave drip. That stalagmite is actually really hard. It's
Mm,
rock, isn't it?
yes.
So if we want to undo that, it takes a moment to moment awareness and intervention on our own part. And we're living this life. If we think about Mary Oliver and her statement, what will you do with your one most precious
Mm,
life? Why wouldn't we? When we start to see and really reinforce for ourselves what we are actually doing in each step of that change is self love. And I have seen this over and over with my clients that as they create boundaries, as they say
mm,
no, as they say yes to themselves, they go, huh, I actually realize that I think I might be worthy because the mere act of doing that change, making that change for oneself, I'm talking about change that's really important to our innermost core. Some people might say soul, some people say heart, some people say spirit. And if you want to stay secular, innermost. If we know that, if we're really tuned into that on a very deep, tender, and loving level with
mhm.
ourselves, we're not really going to question the chopping wood carrying the water.
The work.
I call it chop wood, carry water. I always love that
Amazing.
scene in Kill Bill, which is like one of my favorite all time movies, the whole series. And she's like literally carrying the pails of water and chopping the wood and hitting a piece of wood with her
Mhm.
hand, right? That is our lives. And people will say about marriage and about life is hard. Being an adult is hard. Being married is hard. I recently was reading a book called Will Our Love Last for some of my clients because I recommend it to my clients. I was like, I think I just want to reread this book. And he said, you know what? A lot of couples come to me and say, marriage is commitment and hard work. Who the hell stays around for commitment and hard work when it's not any pleasure? Same thing for life, if we say that, right? So if we find what's really important to us and go for it, and we make changes in service of that thing that feeds us, we can chop wood and carry water, do so happily, actually.
I think it's important that we know more about this book because the book is really focused on microdosing and microdosing psilocybin specifically, although I could say you can use it for LSD. It's about insights that come up while you're taking this subperceptual amount of mind-altering substance. Before we get into the origin of the book and how you came to be the co-author of this journal, let's talk about microdosing and the fact that SetSet is all about evidence-based information and working with clinicians to bring proven tools and education to the consumer who is looking really to do this on their own, which is 3 out of 4 people that are curious about psychedelics. Microdosing psilocybin does not have any clinical evidence that shows that it's more effective than placebo. So I always like to start the conversation. What's the research around this? Why are we trusting this? How did you come to be a believer in this intervention? What are you seeing? What have you seen?
Yeah. Okay. Let me just describe what microdosing is for viewers who might not be familiar with it first. With psychedelics is the idea of taking a subperceptual dose of one of the psychedelics on a periodic basis. And the idea is that you don't just take it once, you would take it on some sort of regular schedule. And the idea is that this very small amount would be just enough to hit those 5-HT2A receptors, to do a little bit of a sprinkling of those hallucinogens on those receptors so that default mode system where all those 5-HT2A receptors becomes a little bit more flexible. The reason why there hasn't been any studies, research studies that have shown that it's beyond placebo is that it's very difficult to study microdosing in this scheduled long-term way. And I'm talking not long-term, it's maybe even 2 weeks or something like that. Our journal is based on a 12-week microdosing protocol that you might do for yourself, but you could do any amount of weeks with it. There was a blinded naturalistic setting study done, and I'll send you the link for that if you want to put it in the show notes for folks to look at. And in that study, what they did say is that the placebo effect was there, meaning a placebo effect is when people have none of the psychedelic hallucinogen and they're still reporting changes, right? So that was still there. But they also did find in this study that there was real evidence that the microdosing was helping people with some of their aspects about perspective on life and feelings of positivity. So I was very surprised at that. That was the first study I've seen that way. And there is a microdosing company, I believe it's based out of Europe somewhere, it might be London, where they are doing a microdosing study. And it's very difficult for them to do because guess what? Most people are microdosing in their homes as a mindfulness. It's hard to get people to be compliant to come to a facility and for them to measure and make sure that people. So in this naturalistic study, what they had is they showed people how to create the capsules. I think they might have provided capsules that were blinded and opaque so that people didn't know if they were actually taking the microdose or not. But the study researchers did know whether they were taking and when.
And we don't have results. You do have, you're going to send me the results of the study. Oh,
but other studies have really shown that the placebo effect is really the main reason, that people's expectation of change is what really changed it.
okay.
Right?
Whatever works.
Whatever works.
Yeah.
And if it gets people to pay attention a little bit more to their own processes and what's coming up for them, I say, what harm could it do? Okay, caveat, I do want to say, there's the 5-HT2B receptor, which they do say has some receptors in the valves of the heart. So what they don't know is whether psychedelics traditional hallucinogens. That's psilocybin, LSD, mescaline-containing cacti, ayahuasca, probably ibogaine too. That what happens is when they're hitting the 5-HT2B receptors, there's a theoretical possibility that it could cause hardening of certain valves.
Over time when
And
taken on a regular basis, right?
yeah, but they don't have evidence
Mm,
of that. It's just a theoretical framework for now. And I bet you in time, once they figure out how to track that information in a more
mhm.
reliable way, they'll have more information on that. But it's not something that is ethical for them to study and say, go have microdosing for a year and then let's see if your valves harden. That would not be an ethical study.
Interesting.
Right.
But
Yeah.
why? Novel
Mm.
compounds, molecules not related to psychedelics are given to study participants all the time, and we don't know what's going to happen over I don't understand the disconnect in the ethics.
Good
Man.
question. I'm not a research principal investigator and have never held
Mhm.
that role, but it's a very good
Yeah.
question. But it is some bit of a concern. So somebody has some cardiac issues or vulnerabilities. It's something they might want to think about how often they might be microdosing. Again, microdosing is at subperceptual. It's usually 5 to 10% of a full dose. So most people are using psilocybin and LSD, but some people are microdosing cannabis. Some people even might want to microdose like lion's mane or
Mhm.
something like that. One of the protocols with psilocybin is, every third day. That's the James Fadiman approach. Every third day, you microdose with psilocybin or LSD. And then the Paul Stamets approach, he's a mycologist, activist, amazing person. And his suggestion is either 4 or 5 days with the microdose and one or anywhere from 2 to 3 days off. And when you do microdose each of those days, he calls it the Stamets stack. You don't have to buy his product. It's just lion's mane and will cause vasodilation in
Mhm.
the body. So the theory is that maybe the mushrooms reach the brain more. So
I heard that it may be because it causes a natural flushing reaction so that we're not tempted to take more than the
mm.
microdose that's been prescribed.
David Nude said he believes that most people are not really microdosing, that they're just going above the microdose to a slightly perceptual dose. I almost would agree with him because it's not completely subperceptual.
And the leaves do
Mhm.
look different when you go out on your walk. One
That's
thing that I
right.
hear from people is, "I couldn't feel anything, so I just stopped doing it." I think that people are
Yeah.
seeking that shift in perception, even if
Yeah.
it's so they're like, "Okay, the medicine is in me, and I can rely on that, and I can do something with that today." So, do you have any thoughts on
Mhm.
rest days? Because the Statement stack has the rest days all in a row.
Yeah.
Fadiman is putting rest days in between your doses. Kendra, who is the director of
Mm.
programming here at SET, follows the Fadiman protocol and really believes that maybe you
Mhm.
don't have 2 rest days in between, but you should absolutely have 1. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I follow the Fadiman
Okay,
protocol.
great.
I like to have usually 2 days in between
Okay,
actually for
great.
myself at
And
minimum.
you chose a
Yeah.
12-week protocol for the journal.
Mhm.
From.
Yes. Yeah, so I thought about my background in working in transformation and
Mhm,
change in psychotherapy with clients and really just reflected and could see that this idea of the 90
mhm,
days is a really important number. It's actually in a lot of tr ancient traditions, Hindu
mhm,
traditions. I trained as a Kundalini yoga teacher, and I remember when my teacher had me do 90-day yoga and mantra sets, mindfulness sets. One of the theories was at 30 days, breaking through some blocks. At 60 days, you're still in the middle of breaking the
mhm.
habit. And at 90 days, you've broken it and you've got something new going on. I like this idea of a 90-day cycle. And also, as a psychotherapist, I think about it that way with my
Mhm.
clients in 90-day periods. Where are we at? Where did we start? And where are we at 90 days? I'm not so much of a traditional psychotherapist. I have a little bit of a coach inside of
Mhm.
me where I want my clients to feel like things are
Mhm.
moving
Mhm.
as well. I don't like the idea of just coming in and we're doing the same thing every week.
Right.
We also created it as a 12-week process because we thought 4 weeks to open into the process
Hmm.
and to arrive and we
Yeah.
land. And it's like at the 3 to 4 week period, we've landed in our own process and know
Hmm.
what it is every third day. And then we're like, oh, yeah, these are the things I'm noticing. So I thought of the beginning 4 weeks as the preparation stage or just entering into a process of our intention with
Hmm.
microdosing. And then the middle weeks, that week 4 through 8 is like the grungy part where like our hands are in the dirt. We're like,
Hmm.
whoa, yeah, this is some stuff we're seeing. This is some things, these are some interactions I'm having, and I don't like the way this feels. I'm noticing this conditioned reality, conditioned identity
Hmm.
of mine, and it feels like a shoe that's too
Right.
tight. It's pinching me. It's giving me a blister. I'm tired of the
Hmm.
blister. I'm tired of putting the band-aids on the
Hmm.
blister. And then the last 4 weeks we think of as a time period of consolidation. What are you gonna take with you? How do you take this mindset? This mimics the idea of if you were to do a single high dose or journey dose of a psychedelic, we would think about doing the preparation, the work, and the
Hmm.
consolidation. And so it's like a transposing kind of metaphor, if you will,
Hmm.
for me and for our book. This idea of just opening in. What are you noticing in these first 4
Right.
weeks? You have some intention you're bringing in. How do they mix
Right.
together? Right? How do they mix together?
Right. Taking the time to set this
And they
up,
don't.
not have the answers as soon as you open the book.
Yeah, and it also bucks against this capitalistic idea. Take the pill. Oh, I don't feel anything. Right? Chuck with
Yeah.
cherry water.
How did you get interested in microdosing specifically?
Yeah.
Did that come out of your client work?
No, it didn't come out of my client work. It came out of my personal work. I had been for years very deeply engaged in having the honor of getting invited into different types of plant
Hmm.
ceremonies. Ayahuasca, Wachuma, which is San
Hmm.
Pedro, psilocybin, and LSD. And I had very big journeys from probably 2013 through 2018 or so. In 2013, I had my first experience with psilocybin. And it was around some fertility issues that I was having at the time and about whether to continue with fertility treatments. At the time, I was turning 41, going into 42, and wondering how much longer do I want to subject my body to this, and how much longer is it safe for us to keep trying? And I really couldn't see through to an answer. And in a psilocybin journey, only with 1 gram of dried mushrooms really took me in such a radical direction, just really helped me see the reasons why I wanted to have a child. And for me to also know there's different ways to have that energy in the world, my mother energy in the world.
Wow.
So it was super powerful. In the years following, I had experiences with ayahuasca, and I would say my first psilocybin journey was equivalent to an ayahuasca journey. It was that powerful from 1 gram. And in the book, I say the big hammers were these big experiences. These were big hammers that broke me down. It made me see all of the conditioned identities that I was living and
Mm,
roles. And so when my co-author,
mm,
Shinyi, asked me for some advice, she said, I would like to microdose and I'd like to get off of my
mm.
antidepressants.
Okay.
This is all in the book, so I'm not
Sure.
sharing anything
Yes.
confidential. She said, I'd like to and I wanted to work with this other person, but they're not able to work with me. They told me that it could possibly go really wrong if I don't have somebody
Okay.
to talk to. And I said, it's microdosing. I had experiences with larger doses all through my life. I said, microdosing really is not a problem. It requires a responsibility and accountability and research and thinking about yourself and how you're going to use it more than a cup of coffee.
Okay.
Let's not make it automatic. Let's
Sure.
not make it part of our
Sure.
default mode way of
Right.
being, right? Yeah. And I said, yeah, to really enter into that mindfulness space. She has been a Zen Buddhist meditator for years, and her poetry is just so seeped in that tradition. You can feel it. You feel like you're actually in Sangha with her when you're reading her work. And so she asked me for this advice, and I didn't realize that at this moment, me saying yes was me saying yes to being an
Right.
educator. So I started microdosing with her. This was in 2020 or something like
Yeah.
that. So while I call the big psychedelic experiences and journeys the big hammers that broke me
Hmm.
apart and helped me see how many shame identities I was in, I call the microdosing the little screwdrivers, like the ones you use to fine tune your glasses, the little wrenches that we use to tighten or loosen the nuts and
Right.
bolts. And that's how I came to start writing this book with her. And she said, "Do you want to write this book on microdosing?" And I said, "Shania," I'm like, "I'm just a therapist. I'm just a social worker." But the thing is, that I knew I could bring were the
Hmm.
questions and the way in which I do share on a vulnerable level where it's appropriate to show my humanity with my clients. And I was like, that's really in the book. Like these little, very short little essays that introduce each of our topics. Like our first chapter is opening into the
Hmm.
senses. Prior to that, we have other chapters on how to prepare. And this idea of opening the senses, what questions do we ask to open into curiosity? And maybe this is a more pleasant way to enter into our change process.
I should mention that we know
Yeah.
one another through Shinyi. I was giggling when you were talking her work, Buddhist nature of hers, because she is just like the coolest. When you're around her, she's just so matter of fact. It's just like she really is, you're getting her through and through. This is a person who is sure of
The
themselves here. Yeah,
authenticity,
it's palpable.
realness,
And you're American. Am I describing you in a way that feels
right? To get more granular, Shinyi is Taiwanese American and I'm
Mhm.
Chinese American. Another reason we came closer, we had known each other 20 years ago. She was my poetry teacher in Boston. And then we stayed in touch through Facebook. And in 2020, she was completing a second master's degree at a college here, IAIA here, which is a famous master's of fine arts. She wanted the experience and wanted to study with a certain
okay.
teacher. And so we started talking. And what happened in that process of 2020, to remember, the women, 6 Asian women were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia. And the way the media talked about this was that he eliminated his desire by murdering these women. And it was a flashpoint for myself and Shinyi. It might have been, I think it was for many women, many Asian women across the
Must.
country, to be talked about as this objectified thing in the media. And I went through an incredible recalibration with my husband, who is white.
Mm.
And I entered into really deep conversations around
And
identity.
Shinyi's husband is also white.
Yeah.
Calibration for her, but that's a
Yeah.
point of
Yeah.
commonality that you 2 have. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And so reclaiming my Chinese and Asian identity as a woman, that's a really, that was a
Mhm.
different level. Right. And that was part also why I chose to move forward and be public about coming out of my psychedelic closet and talking publicly about psychedelics and conditioned
Mm.
identities. In this book, very much so, just really talking a lot about our own processes of undoing those conditioned identities and using that as an example, possibly a meeting of our humanity, that we're all undoing conditioned identities, whoever we are. And that's really such an important theme in the book. It took me about 10 tries to write my introductory chapter.
So what were you afraid to share? What were you concerned about in that moment? And just sure that you were being clear, that you were being respectful to yourself and to this movement that I think you are, whether you wanted to start one or not, right? You're part of one, but you're also starting one. So going through your mind when you were doing rewrite.
Oh, I can remember. I would say my earlier drafts of it were me identifying the parts of me that want to perform perfection. It's still there. I still fight it. I'm still undoing that layer. I will be undoing that
Mm.
layer
Right.
constantly. even in this moment. That's human.
Yes, progress over perfection is a mantra that I cannot say enough. It has helped me in so many ways, and it is a process.
It's a
Yeah.
process. And then also when I love what you said, progress over perfection, because then for me, such an imprint of my ancestral trauma that I carry is around shame. And it was born out of dynasties and dynasties of people and violence that was happening all across the countryside in China every 20 to 50 years, where entire villages would be decimated and the men would all be killed and the women would all be enslaved. At some point, Confucius was traveling around saying, we need to have a moral code. But then it became that moral code. And he really was talking about an internalized moral code. Wonderful idea, taken to the extreme in China. We can see the draconian things that are happening in China and how the people are silenced and what they're doing to Tibet, Nepal.
Right.
And that internalized piece, even though my father was the one who immigrated and my mother was born in the United States, both Chinese, that imprint of shame is so strong in there because it's not like I walk around saying I feel shameful. No one walks around saying I feel shameful. Guess how it turns out? I have to do it right or else. I have to be useful. I better be useful.
The implication being I have no use.
That's right. The one child policy
Mm.
necessitated many families wanting to have boys instead of girls. And now they're really having a problem there. There's deeper things there that I could share that I have learned through transmissions, through experiences of my ancestors talking to me, many of whom I wasn't close to when they were living even. I couldn't even speak the same language because my family assimilated so much. My family didn't teach us how to speak Chinese because they wanted us to have no accent. So I actually speak more Spanish and French than I do Chinese. I understand more in both of those languages.
The generations before us, I think, for the most part, are trying to do what they think is best for us.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing how we came to have this book in the world. How do you describe this book to people?
So what I would say is in the book, there's going to be room for readers to track maybe some of their emotions, their somatic sensations, their mood or feelings, things like that. So there's a little bit of a checkbox area, and then there's open area for them to put their observations. And so those are 3 days, two to 3 days of pages of that in between. We also offer open pages within each of the chapters so that folks could really take those questions at the beginning of each chapter. Let's say it's opening into the senses. What are some of the things that people might be observing, right? Taking a few moments, let your gaze wander and write down everything you notice around you. What we're really doing in all of this is we're not on the treadmill of the capitalistic world. We're not producing something. We're going inward and connecting inward with all of us in our body, in our mind, in our emotions, to our heart, our soul, our core.
I have not even said the name of the book.
Small doses of awareness. So the idea is to bring those small doses of awareness and really ingest them, really savor them, really feel them inside of you. Because that is how we actually reclaim our humanity and slow down and not feel so compressed.
Right. How is this supporting our integration process?
I think it's 2 parts, right? The book is small doses of awareness. And what are you going to do with it on a tactical moment to moment basis? And so book really, there's this constant by committing it to the word and the writing in there, that what we're hoping is actually in the neuroscience, right? When we have a realization, let's say we realize something about a work relationship or some interaction we're having with our romantic partner, our brains are just wired this way that we want to complete the loop. But when we put it out into paper, when we put it into the book, we write it, guess what it does? It gives us some aspect of completion and seeing it in concrete form. There is something about that, I think, putting it in concrete form is like we're writing a contract to ourselves, because how many times are we entering into implicit, unconscious contracts? My hope is that folks might use this book and they might even get a second copy and do it again if they
Yeah,
want to for
exactly.
themselves. They might do it with a group of people, not as accountability, like, did you do your homework? But hey, what are you noticing this
Right.
week in chapter one? What are you noticing in this week of, in the middle, the art of not doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are you noticing as you notice? Have you, as you notice what you're feeling obligated about, what you can, what are you feeling compelled to do? What are you obligated to do that you can stop doing? How many things are we doing just by habit? We're
Right.
doing, right?
What are your thoughts on this DIY approach to microdosing and
Yeah.
psychedelics in general?
I think some people very comfortable, maybe they've used psychedelics before on their own, and those folks are going to be really comfortable DIY
Hmm.
with
Yeah.
microdosing. Folks who have had no experience with psychedelics might have a little bit more nervousness and trepidation. For those folks, I suggest they talk to friends who are knowledgeable, or they engage with somebody who can help educate them and connect them to resources. Like Kendra's got really great introductory videos for people educating themselves. Start small, go slow, and do not operate heavy machinery. Do not have responsibilities
Hmm.
afterwards. Give yourself plenty of space to observe what the effects of these powerful medicines are inside
Right.
of you. The right psychedelic medicine is different for every person. So it might be different depending on people's metabolism and biological sensitivities. Some of the benefits I've seen are clarity, a lot of clarification, ease, feeling of ease. That's been a big one I've heard a lot. Oh, I didn't realize I could feel ease in my body. And that's mostly with psilocybin microdosing. Most folks who are using LSD report it feels like ease in a direction, like they've got a lot to
Mm-hmm.
get done. So they feel ease in that clarity of focus and a flow, a state of flow. Some folks with psilocybin do report at the beginning they experience some sleepiness. And for those folks, they might consider taking it alongside maybe some cacao.
Mm.
Cacao is another very powerful medicine, and one should also do their research there. It's a spirit. It really is a
Yeah.
spirit, and it needs to be respected that way.
Links to some ceremonial cacao that I trust in the show notes here. Yeah.
Some people have found that they might need to microdose at night too. Do not microdose LSD at night. It will keep
Yeah.
you up.
So what are some challenges that people might find as they're with psychedelics in general, with microdosing specifically?
I would not suggest that anybody ever microdose and try to do anything that requires a lot of analytical, i.e., statistical skills. Running a
Mhm.
meeting after microdosing,
So
not a
you
great
would
idea.
say,
I think it's just really responsible not to expose other people to your
oh,
experiments.
mm,
Yeah, I think it's important until you've really integrated that
mhm,
knowledge. And in fact, I think the knowledge can be integrated and you need not be and should not be in an altered state while you're providing service. Like when I'm providing psychotherapy to my
yeah,
clients, I am never going to be in an
right,
altered state while I'm with
right.
them under any psychedelic. I will not
Mhm,
ever do that. That's an ethical imperative
mhm,
for me.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I will say is, as a warning, one should not think about having a microdose and then they need to pick up their child. So this is something that parents might want to take under.
Mhm,
A microdose can last anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, depending on one's sensitivity and the amount. If you're going to try and do a spreadsheet after that or run a Zoom meeting after that, where you have to have a PowerPoint and you're presenting something or having to answer questions, probably not the best choice. There is the case of Justin Zhao, who is based out of San Francisco, and his microdose was more than a microdose. He lost his company because of it.
really
Terrible.
appreciate you sharing that what can go wrong
Hmm.
because in this
Hmm.
sector, as professionals,
Hmm.
I find that people want everything to just be positive because there has been so much negativity that's been brought on these practices and on these medicines over the decades that there's so many people that are fearful of saying the truth. And
Mm.
we are helping people navigate their life and they should know.
In indigenous cultures, they have been microdosing for eons, and that's where we learned
Sure.
this
Right.
from. They were using it to support them with hunting. In Shipibo cultures, they will put a little tiny little dab of ayahuasca on the
Mhm.
baby's tongue or on their finger for them to taste it. The dogs sometimes will eat the purgatives that come out of people during
Hmm.
ayahuasca ceremonies,
Interesting.
and they're drawn to it. And that's very
Yeah.
interesting, right? The idea of microdosing doesn't come from here. So let's honor how these were using it and actually use it as a way to make us more human, more community minded,
Hmm.
treat our fellow humans
Hmm.
well and with respect and
Right.
integrity
Right.
as we hold that. So that's my hope for psychedelics and microdosing, is that people can walk more themselves
The more
there.
of us that are open to these modalities, the more we can be open to people walking their own path and being themselves, right?
That's
Thank
right.
you very much for
Yeah.
your time and sharing
Thank
all
you.
your wisdom and experience and so much about your book.
You can find me at www.amywonghope.com.
Mhm.
It's Amy Wong Hope, Hope. Like, I hope there's ice cream. I have to often say that because being Asian, people might think it's just
Oh,
HO. Yeah. Folks can find it on several different places: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, booksellers.net, which connects to all sorts of smaller
okay.
booksellers. So if you want to support your local
Mhm.
bookstore,
Make sure that's in the show
thank
notes as well.
you so much.
Fine. Thank you for joining us for today's show. I'm April, and I'll be back the next installment of SetSet Show, where we cover everything you need to have a safe, supported psychedelic experience in the wild.